Hi, everybody. Let's talk about Mars in Scorpio, the current transit of Mars, which entered Scorpio. Well, that's when it leaves Scorpio. So 5th of November, and it entered Scorpio basically a couple of days ago. So there's Mars in Scorpio right there. And Mars transits the entire zodiac. Takes 2 years for Mars to travel around the zodiac. So basically, the last time Mars was in Scorpio was about 2 years ago. Um, the first aspect that Mars picks up is a square to Pluto, which I'll circle back to that. Now, what is Mars about? Mars is about our desires, our willpower, our ability to act on things, to assert ourselves, to defend others. It's our driving force and motivation, energy. Um, and we all know that Mars is the planet of war, but Mars in Scorpio is its home sign, by the way. So it's an incredibly powerful Mars. It's an incredibly powerful position for Mars to be in. And I've done a whole video on this a few years ago where I spoke about the differences between Mars in Aries and Mars in Scorpio because Mars rules both those signs. And the essence and takeaway of that video was that Mars does better in Scorpio. Um, and the primary reason for that is because the water element, cools Mars down a little bit because Mars can be it's a planet of heat, so it's a very fiery energy. And put it in Aries, it's basically all guns blazing. So over the next several weeks, we're looking at an opportunity to work with Mars in a very personal way for the purposes of transforming various things that we wish to transform. It could just be one thing, but I mean, the truth is that we can't transform a whole bunch of things in just a few weeks anyway. That's the reality. So let's be realistic and choose maybe just one thing. That's the first thing I would suggest. And also, where is Mars transiting through your birth chart? That area will be very energized. But not only energized, it will be a focal point of your instincts actually being activated and coming to life in quite an intense manner. Now, the very interesting thing that's happening with Mars in Scorpio is it is corresponding and aligning with a particular festival called Navratri, which is a Hindu festival in India that occurs every year at approximately the same time. It varies, it can chop and change from a couple of weeks. Sometimes it's in September, sometimes it starts in October. This particular festival is something I've been following for many, many years because ultimately it is a festival that corresponds to very specific feminine deities, divinities, all of which who hold very particular and specific attributes and qualities um, that really assist us in our personal journey of transformation. And also, it is a festival that ultimately celebrates the defeat of the light over darkness. And that's what the whole essence of it is. But in the process, it runs for 9 days and 9 nights. And in that process of 9 days and 9 nights, there are different divinities that show up that speak to very different purposes and meanings, reflect different characteristics, and there's different rituals and processes involved that include offerings to the divinities, that include different colors associated with the divinities. So you might wear yellow on this particular day, or you might wear a yellow scarf to evoke that particular divinity, for instance. If you don't know about this and you're interested in exploring it, I highly recommend it. Even if you don't believe in Hinduism or are not a follower of those sorts of traditions, it doesn't really matter. What matters is what the essence of this particular festival represents, which is the defeat of darkness with the light. And that can be really a metaphor that we can, turn back into ourself and work with our own dark shadow material, because there is no one walking on this earth that does not have a dark side. And anyone who thinks that they don't is delusional, because we live in a world of duality where both the darkness and the light exists. The problem with the darkness relative to this dual reality is that many people are unconscious of their own darkness and subsequently merely project it externally onto others or onto things. And so that's where the problem occurs, because once you project something of your own material, of your own subconscious, of your own desires, which is Mars, then you are not in touch with it, right? And you have projected it onto something else or somebody else. So then that person or that situation becomes your darkness, and they're a hook for it. That's the problem of being unconscious about our shadow things and about our own darkness. Darkness is not something to fear or to block or to demonize. It's actually about becoming more aware of our own darkness and integrating it so that we express it in a conscious way versus being unconscious and projecting it all around us and therefore not integrating and not evolving. So this journey of these goddesses over the next 9 days and 9 nights, which we are in day 4 right now, by the way, it started 4 days ago, is just a perfect synchronicity with Mars being in Scorpio, because Mars is the planet that corresponds, as I said, to our desires and our willpower, our drive, our motivation. And in Scorpio, Scorpio is the classic archetype of transformation. It corresponds to various symbols which show us the process of transformation. There are several different animals that connect to the Scorpio. There's the snake, there's the scorpion, there's the eagle, and then there's the phoenix. And the scorpion is at the bottom, right at the bottom in terms of unconsciousness. And then the snake is the next sort of level up, if you like. And then the eagle is another level up. And then the phoenix is the ultimate, which is, we all know what a phoenix symbolizes, the ultimate transformation, rising from the ashes. So when Mars is in Scorpio, we can really focus and tune into this energy and use it in a way to help us transform something in our life. We can't transform everything in just a few weeks. So let's be realistic and just maybe work on one area in our life. Maybe choose one thing that you really are ready to dive deeply into with Mars in Scorpio, and with the aid of these particular feminine divinities who are leading us to processing both the darkness and the light and defeating the darkness. That I suppose that terminology might imply that darkness is bad, but we've got to broaden our perspective and our understanding and realize that even that statement, the light is victorious over the darkness. Again, that's really actually just communicating to us that we've integrated our own darkness in some kind of way. We've become more conscious. That's the whole point. So Mars in Scorpio lining up with Navratri is just a beautiful and powerful opportunity to work on something that we really want to work on. I just want to read a couple of paragraphs to you from one of Jeffrey Wolf Green's books, and this is about Mars in Scorpio. And although this is more specifically written about a natal placement of Mars in Scorpio, we can take away from this a lot of value and overlay it into the transit of Mars in Scorpio, because these sorts of themes in various ways will be noticeable for each of us, if we really tune into Mars in Scorpio. Once again, though, remember, look at where Mars is transiting in your birth chart, because it is that particular area of the chart, meaning that particular area of life, that will be activated, animated, and energized at this time. Not only that, but it's the area of life where your instincts will be really super powerful for the next several weeks until the 5th of November. That's when Mars goes into Sagittarius. So he says the placement will correlate to a soul that desires to penetrate and understand the mystery of itself. That is the soul wanting to understand the mystery of its own self. This is what Mars in Scorpio points to. Then he says Mars in Scorpio will produce an extremely intense energy system that is inverted from within itself. The inversion of this energy is used by the soul to consciously focus on the nature of its desires, the nature of its motivations and intentions that are reflected in those desires, and the psychology that those desires, motivations, and intentions produce. The soul's intention is to understand the nature of its emotional dynamics and the fears that emanate from those emotional dynamics, to understand the nature of its anger and rage, to understand the nature of personal power and proper and improper use of such power, to understand the right use of will at an egocentric and soul level, to understand how the misuse of will is linked to manipulating others in order for the Mars in Scorpio person's desires to be met, to understand the nature of its personal limitations relative to what is and is not possible, the reasons and role of inner and outer confrontation, and to understand the nature of sexual energy and the right use of such energy. Now, you probably will need to pause that a couple of times, and you might want to make some notes, or you may want to bypass it. That's entirely up to you. But I find that paragraph incredibly valuable because we can relate that to so many different aspects of our life. And where he talks about anger and rage and fear, these are all words that really connect to Mars, right? And, Scorpio will show us our deepest unconscious insecurities, our deepest fears, and how we either suppress them or how we either confront them, and or how we may attract those very things in other people or attract that dynamic in a particular relationship in order for us to grow and evolve, because we might be projecting some of that onto another. And that can be initially part of a process of seeing aspects of yourself if you are conscious and aware enough to recognize that. If you are not, you will just let the other person be the hook, and that person will be the demon, and that person will be all wrong, and you won't learn and grow in any way, shape, or form because you're perfect, right? That other person's a demon. So, this information is just really, really, really valuable. There's just one other smaller paragraph that I would like to read as well. Um, so he makes a comment here where he says, Mars in Scorpio desires to learn the value of emotional sexual commitment versus following every compulsive attraction. Within this, Mars in Scorpio desires to learn about its sexual compulsions, its attraction to sexual taboos, the nature of sexual possession and the jealousy that follows, the nature of its projected sexual fears linked with a partner's potential infidelities, and the nature of its sexual desires that are linked with the archetype of the dark Eros. Now, that paragraph is highly significant as well, and that leans more into the sexual energy and the sexual component of the archetype of Scorpio. One of the things about the eighth house and Scorpio and Pluto is the experience of betrayal and or the fear of betrayal. And so if someone has a memory in their soul, which most people do, of having been betrayed, and people who have strong Pluto, Scorpio, eighth house Mars placements in their chart are more likely to really resonate with this in their life on a sort of day-to-day basis, if you like, right? As a theme, a constant theme in their life. So it's an important theme that they need to transform. The issue of betrayal is really, really big for certain people, in other words, is what I'm trying to say. And, it's very interesting because they will attract that very same situation if they are very unconscious about these patterns and themes in their chart. Because if you have strong Scorpio, eighth house, Mars, Pluto placements, it means that you've had these sorts of themes in previous incarnations, the experience of betrayal, that is either having been betrayed or betraying others or both, but to a maximum level. So there's a very strong memory of that in the soul. And subsequently you come back and you choose those themes and patterns in your chart because you need to work on that area, on the area of trust, on the area of betrayal. And so, how will you learn about betrayal? You'll learn about it by attracting it. So, these are some of the very interesting and powerful themes to consider for yourself while Mars is in Scorpio. It is, it really points to ample opportunity for really deep personal transformation. It might be that you are in a particular relationship or a particular situation that you have been very attached to and have been finding it very difficult to remove yourself from that relationship or that situation. Mars in Scorpio can be very powerful in this process because with Mars in Scorpio, we're talking about like an X-ray zoom lens, right? Zooming right in to the core heart truth of the situation, of the relationship, of whatever it is that's going on for you. And it is about connecting to that deep willpower and deep desire of the soul to be. You have to be really transparent and honest, though, with yourself, with the situation, and with the other person, in order to be able to truly work with this kind of energy. Because if you go at it from the point of manipulating, which is one of the biggest things for Scorpio, when it's acting very unconsciously and when it's acting from a place of the fear of being betrayed, right? The fear of being controlled and so forth, it will come up with these very manipulative measures to try and manage that or cope with that or to try to overpower another. But none of that really ultimately leads to profound personal transformation. It just leads to, possibly more heartache, um, games being played, power trips, power struggles, and the like. And, some people get off on that. And some people are addicted to that behavior as well. So again, it just depends with, who you are and what's going on in your life. The square from Mars to Pluto, which is within range for about a week or so, possibly even longer, is a really important window to watch because that can, that can be a time bomb, a ticking time bomb internally that just gets activated and triggered by circumstances that otherwise wouldn't trigger you, that otherwise wouldn't have that kind of effect on you. It's a very volatile energy, and I highly recommend that you really observe the intensity of feelings that might be rising within you that might be very valid, and you have good reason for what you are feeling and experiencing, but perhaps the reaction might be a little bit too strong in certain situations. It just depends. But it is something that is important to monitor and observe within yourself. And also, I want to say that what's going to happen is Mercury and Mars are going to catch up together. And I find this really interesting because I've got a very interesting thing to tell you about that. Which there they are there. Okay, so Mercury is catching up. Okay, so there's a lead up, of several days before this. Mercury is catching up to Mars. And over here on the 20th of October, they form their conjunction. And the reason I find this particularly interesting is because Rudolf Steiner once said, and I don't know how many of you know who he is, but he's one of the most, or he was one of the most authentic visionaries and psychics that we've ever seen, in my opinion. He was the real deal. And his works are so vast. His teachings, his lectures, his books, and the like. You could spend your whole lifetime trying to read it and understand it, and you probably won't get it all. It's that there's so much there. But anyway, that being said, because he had a very interesting perspective and understanding of the planets and the stars and the sky. And it was more of an esoteric perspective and view, if you like. And one thing he said was that, so normally we associate Mercury, Hermes, the planet Mercury, to all things connecting to speech, communication, writing, reading, researching, and the like, particularly voice and speech. But Rudolf Steiner said that from an esoteric level, Mars is the planet that actually corresponds to speech. And when you first hear that, you might think, no, that doesn't make any sense at all. Why would Mars connect to speech? And I can understand why somebody might initially have that perspective, but you can dig deeper in this, and you don't even have to dig that deep. Just think about it in these terms. When you communicate something, right? Especially if you are communicating something really important, right? Something that's coming from deep inside your soul, let's say, something that's coming from very deeply in your heart. You know, that energy is incredibly powerful, and it comes through some sort of personal desire, which is Mars, which is Scorpio, to want to communicate, that idea, that opinion, that perspective. Or it could be that you're having an argument or a conflict or a debate, or you're really wanting to impress something very important with your speech, right? Now, there are public speakers who do this all the time. They're not just using the skill of Mercury or Hermes, they are also using the will and desire and power of Mars. So here we are with Mars and Mercury catching up together. They will be, dancing together in the sky, as it were, for several days. And that's going to be a very important window from the point of view of our speech, really delving very deeply into something that we may really need to communicate, whether that's to a group of people or to an individual or a couple of people. It could be your partner, it could be your family, it could be anyone. But it is a very, very powerful energy. And because we're talking about those two planets being in Scorpio, there's this is soul territory. This is the communication, the language, the ideas, the desire behind it, and the impact comes from a soul level. And that's the sort of energy that we will be projecting, if you like, through our, voice. I don't mean projecting onto another. Of course, many will project it onto another. But when I say projecting in this instance, I'm just talking about the projection of our voice will be through the power of the archetype of Scorpio and Hermes, Mercury, with Mars. So you can imagine just how powerful that energy is right there and how that might really help serve certain people in some very difficult situations where they haven't had a voice for themselves. They haven't had the confidence or the courage, because Mars is courage, to voice their opinion, their perspective, their desires, their beliefs, and so forth, whether that's again to one person or to a group. It just depends on who you are and what's going on in your life. But Mars here with Mercury really amplifies something very important that is going to come through speech for each of us. So those are the main things that I wanted to highlight with Mars in Scorpio over the next few weeks. And I particularly love that Mars in Scorpio is happening with Navratri as well. Because if we are really focused on something in our life right now that we really want to truly and honestly try and transform it, this is an incredibly powerful opportunity to do so, both with Mars in Scorpio and Navratri, the divinities who are all leading us to a path of being in tune with the light, not banishing the darkness as in demonizing it, but actually being victorious in the sense of having gone through some type of initiation and having transformed something and integrated something in our life from our own darkness, as it were. And you might choose to work on this journey very privately and personally just on your own. It may not involve anybody at all. If it could be in a partnership, a personal partnership, it could be working very deeply with your partner on things that you both fear about the relationship or about each other. It could be around fears of, fear of betrayal. It could be that your partner has betrayed you or you've betrayed there's so many different ways of working with this energy. There's the sexual transformative process as well. Like I was reading out of Jeffrey Wolf Green's book before, and he mentioned that the soul desires to really understand that world of, purposeful use of sexual energy and willpower versus just using it in a way to gain personal gain via manipulation. That might be a theme that you're working on at the moment. There's so many personal different journeys that we are each going through, but the the ultimate takeaway of Mars in Scorpio and the Navratri and the Mars Mercury and the Mars square Pluto is about understanding the power of our own willpower and understanding the misuse of power and understanding the power of our sexual energy and also using that wisely, understanding that, sexual energy is, it's like a currency, just as energy is a currency. And if we just, hand that over willy-nilly to anything. We're giving something a lot more than we think we are, to another as well. But that again, that zone there, that's a very interesting zone. I'm talking about the sexual zone because there are different approaches, different perspectives, and people need to experience different things. So there's no judgment in any of this, but it's just really about being aware of the power, you know, of Mars in Scorpio. And I'll just leave you with a quote that I saw the other day, uh, which, I think is absolute gold. Let me just find it. I just need to jump on a social media page of mine to find it. Just give me 2 seconds. Oh my God, as a side note, just something funny, a fun fact, a funny fact. Did you know that a hamster, a little hamster animal, this is true, can drink 2 bottles of vodka in 10 minutes and it won't even be tipsy? Look it up. It's a fact. How fucking hilarious is that? I was pissing myself laughing when I discovered that fact today. I just thought, wow, lucky hamster. But anyway, it was very funny. Okay, let me just find this quote and then I'll close up for today. Where is it? Where are you? Here it is. So listen to this carefully. Time is the only currency you spend without ever knowing your balance. Use it wisely. Isn't that just the most beautiful, powerful quote ever? Because your time here on the planet is, you don't know the balance to that. No one does. So, yeah, I shall leave you guys with those thoughts and let me know what you think, what you feel, any questions, and reach out and let me know if you'd like to have a reading of some kind of your birth chart. On any single level, there are a myriad of ways of looking at a birth chart, and there are, multiple and multiple different types of readings. Sending you all much love, and may this Navratri season and Mars in Scorpio help you in the way that you need it.